Welcome back to the program. As promised, we're going to talk to key crossbench Senator now, David Leyonhjelm, live from the nation's capital. Thanks very much for your company. I saw some comments, David Leyonhjelm, that you made earlier where you were concerned, or you were making the point rather than concerned, that it's more likely after some horse trading that the ABCC bills will be up next week rather than this week. The registered organisation changes are up, now. What about the viability or the chances of the passage of the ABCC bills? The government's quietly confident. Do you think they'll get there?
Yeah, that's a very moot point. I wouldn't guarantee it. They don't have my vote yet. We're still negotiating. I don't think they have a couple of the others either. And they have said that they're not going to bring it on to a vote. They'll allow debate, I think. But they've said they're not going to bring it on to a vote unless they're confident they have the numbers. It wouldn't. I don't think they would regard it as a good look to put it up and then go down again.
How different, even if they get it up, though, Senator, will it need to be from what they took to the DD election? Because obviously they're not going for the joint sitting. They're trying to put amendments into it, which in a sense violates that principle of the joint sitting bills. How different would it need to be for it to stand a chance of passing, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not looking for major changes to the bill. I've come to the conclusion that they will agree to one of my concerns, or fix up one of my concerns, which is removal of the reverse onus of proof. They've agreed to take that out, and so I'll put up an amendment. I understand Nick's got some amendments which are unrelated really to the content of the ABCC. They relate to payment of subcontractors. So it depends on how that's dealt with. I don't know what other crossbenchers are proposing. What I'm looking for is an offset, if you like, in terms of liberty. The ABCC encroaches on liberty. It's irrespective of whether they accept my amendment or not, it still contains things which will leave us with a little less freedom. So I'm looking for something elsewhere which will improve our freedom. I'm talking to the government about various options.
As for the registered organisations bills, that's something that you're of the view that will get through this week, though. The government, when I've spoken to them off the record, are far more confident about that than they are about the ABCC. Yeah.
It depends whether Labor decides that they want to have a symbolic fight over, irrespective of the detail. What I discovered is that I found myself talking to both Labor and the government, and I knew what Labor was looking for, and I spoke to the government about that because it wasn't a confidential discussion, and the government said, oh, well, we can accommodate most of that. So there are amendments being put up by Labor which the government is happy with. There's one or two sticking points where Labor feels reasonably strongly and the government opposes them relatively strongly. So I don't know whether Labor will stop the bill and vote against it at the third reading because of those things or not, after having achieved, most of what it wants to achieve. It's going to be interesting to see. It has become a bit of a totemic issue for both the government and the opposition, this particular bill. 2 years ago, when I first came into the Senate, the Labor Party wouldn't have a bar of anything to do with it, and now they're at the stage where they're putting up amendments to it. So they've moved a long way. The question is whether they've moved enough to vote for it. I don't know yet where that'll end up.
We'll find out soon enough, I suppose. A couple of other ones that are likely to come up this week or next. Keen to get your thoughts on, firstly, whether you think the crossbench will be needed, depending on whether this is something that does or doesn't have bipartisan support, and secondly, where you think the crossbench will ultimately land. Let's start with VET. Is this likely to be something that the government's able to push through the Senate in this last sitting fortnight, do you think?
Yeah, quite likely. It's a cost saving. It's a re-regulation. It's in response to evidence that there were elements in the vocational and education sector that the taxpayers are being ripped off. So opposing it would, look as if you're sanctioning that rip-off. I rather think it probably will get through. I'm not even sure Labor will oppose it in the end. I'm not entirely happy about it because it's re-regulating education sector, but something did need to be done, otherwise the taxpayers were just going to get ripped off to a huge extent.
Something that won't get bipartisan support is Peter Dutton's changes around asylum seekers and their ability to access this country ever into the future, those that are currently being held on Nauru and Manus. It may not get Labor support, but do you think it can get enough support on the crossbenches to become law next week? The Minister suggested to Paul Kelly and I yesterday that it wouldn't be before the Senate this week, but it would most likely get there next week.
Yeah, the government, I think, has a very ambitious idea of what they'll be able to bring on this weekend, particularly next week.
On time constraints?
I don't think they'll get. Yeah, I don't think they'll get through half of what they want to. I mean,
well,
just
on
the
that,
ABCC...
can I jump in again, Senator? We'll go back, sorry to interrupt, but on that, is that another example of this government not managing expectations? Because they have been putting about to some extent that these are the various things that they want to get done in this final sitting fortnight. If you don't think that they've even got the time to get it through, much less the numbers, courtesy of the process of the next fortnight, is this another example of them not managing expectations? Because if they're left short on what they're drumming up as where they expect to land, then they're going to fall short of their own expectations, much less higher expectations that others might put on them.
Yeah, it's not new though. That ever since I came into the Senate, the government has had unrealistic expectations of what can be achieved towards the end of a sitting session. Sometimes they have legitimate reasons for wanting stuff to go through, and the Labor Party will say, all right, well, I understand the reasons for it, we'll accommodate that. But then there are other ones which are really symbolic, and you know, they struggle to get support for it. I think they will struggle to get Labor support and crossbench support on this lifetime ban on visas issue, for example. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they don't even try. I have got a couple of reservations about that bill myself, and we've got some amendments being drafted now.
Well, we know that things like media reform have already been kicked to the curb. They'll be a 2017 issue at best. What do you make of this Deloitte report about the idea that any improvement from commodity prices will be more than offset by low wage growth, hence putting enormous pressure on the budget update that we're going to get ahead of Christmas?
Well, the low wage growth is in part a function of low inflation. In the past, wages have tended to keep up with inflation and then add a productivity element to it. So we have very low inflation. We also have very low productivity growth. So it's no great surprise that that wages growth is low. If wage and salary earners are to sort of put their hands up for higher wages, I think the trade-off has to be higher productivity. And we all know what the barriers to that are.
Is it going to, just final question before I let you go, Senator. I mean, it's been a few weeks now since you were essentially dudded on what you believed were agreements that you had with the government, so-called horse trading, which has gone on forever and a day in the Senate, but it suddenly became a dirty word a few weeks back. Where's this left you as a crossbencher when this government needs to cobble together support? You used to be very pure about these things ideologically, but I can sense a sense of frustration creeping in as real politics sort of, you know, hits you. Where's the government vis-a-vis yourself going forward, not just for this fortnight, but for when they return next year?
I'm still pure, Peter. In fact, I'm probably more pure than I've ever been now. I'm insisting on maintaining my principles. In fact, that's the reason for my negotiating stance over the ABCC. You know, I voted for the second reading at the second reading for the ABCC twice before, and I was in a bit of a quandary as to what to do if it got through to the third reading, because there was elements about it that I didn't like. I'm simply not going to vote for the ABCC this time unless I have a satisfactory agreement with the government that liberty, overall net liberty, is not going to be reduced. I'm just going to stick hard and fast to my principles. I won't vote for an increase in taxes. I won't vote for a reduction in liberty, full stop.
All right, fair enough. Not hard to understand that positioning. David Leyonhjelm, we appreciate your time as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.